In this lesson, we'll be looking at simplifying more algebraic fractions, but in this case, we're going to be looking at questions where we're adding and subtracting fractions. Now, this works a little bit differently to multiplying and dividing. In some ways, it is a little bit trickier than the multiplication and division, but as long as you're following the correct steps, you won't be getting these wrong. So when we're looking at fractions, you need to sort of think back to what we do with normal fractions. So say, for example, if I had 1/3 plus 1/4, we're sort of thinking, how did we go about adding these together? Now, when we were adding just numbered fractions, so two fractions like this, what we needed to do was we had to make the denominators the same first. So this is the first line here. Fractions can be added or subtracted only if the denominators are the same. So if we look at the numbers here, we've got a 3 and the 4 in the denominator, so we can't really add them together. But what we would do is we'd find a lowest common denominator. So if we're looking at 1/3 plus 1/4, our lowest common denominator is going to be 12. Okay, so you're thinking all the numbers on the 3 times tables, all the numbers on the 4 times tables, what's the first number that's in common with both of those? And then so what you do is you multiply the numerator by 4, denominator by 4 to make an equivalent fraction. You multiply top and bottom by 3 in 1/4. And then so what happens there is you've got 4 over 12 plus 3 over 12. Once the denominators are the same, we can then add the numerators together. So we're doing a similar sort of process, but this time we're going to incorporate some algebra into it. And the important thing when we're looking at the algebraic fractions is that you really want to be using the lowest common denominator. So you don't want to just be using any denominator, because if you don't use the lowest common denominator, there will be more things that you need to simplify out of your fraction. Okay, sometimes those things may not be so obvious. So you'll always need to be picking that lowest common denominator. So let's have a look at a couple of these questions. So the first thing we're going to do with each of these is identify the lowest common denominator, and then we'll go about adding and subtracting these fractions. So with this first example, we've got 4k over 3 minus k over 2. You can see that the denominators aren't the same at the moment, so we need to work out what the lowest common denominator is. So LCD. So if I've got 3 and 2, I'm thinking 3 times tables, 2 times tables. The first number that appears on both of them is 6. So what I'll need to do is multiply the first fraction by 2, top and bottom, and I'll multiply the second fraction, top and bottom, by 3. So remember, when you do something to the top and the bottom of a fraction, then you haven't changed it. It's an equivalent fraction. So once I've done that, I'm going to write it out. So that's 8k in the numerator over 6 minus 3k over 6. And once I've got these, if the denominators are the same, I can then subtract the numerators. So what I've got there now is 8k minus 3k, which is 5k over 6. When we look at question B, our denominators are 6 and 9. So if we're looking at 6 and 9, 6 times tables, 9 times tables, and we need to find our lowest number, the lowest common denominator is going to be 18. Okay, so we're not going to just multiply 6 and 9 together. We know 6 times 3 is 18, 9 times 2 is 18. Okay, so we're going to use 18. So we're going to multiply the first fraction, top and bottom, by 3, top and bottom of the second fraction by 2. So the numerator is 15 over 18. And then for the second fraction, 8w over 18. Once the denominators are the same, we can now add the numerators together. But if you look at the numerators, that's a 15 and that's an 8w. So they're actually not like terms. So when we go about writing this out, we're just going to write out the whole thing. So 15 plus 8w over 18. So we can't simplify this any further. Okay, we can't add the 15 and the 8 together because they're not like terms. That's got a W on it and this doesn't. Okay, so we'll just put it all in the top of the fraction over the 18. All right, question C, we've got 2x in the denominator and x squared in the other denominator. Now this one's a bit trickier because we've got algebra in the denominator. So you're sort of thinking, what's the minimum amount of stuff I need in order to have already incorporated all of that and all of that? So when I'm looking for the lowest common denominator, I know I need to have a 2 and an x as a minimum. So let's just write that out first, 2x. Now, if I'm looking at this second denominator, I've got x squared there. So I need to have at least a square in x squared in the lowest common denominator. So then the lowest common denominator is 2x squared. So if we look at the first fraction, we need to, because we've got 2x, we need to change it into x squared. We're going to multiply top and bottom by x. For the second fraction, we've got x squared. We're still missing a 2, so we're going to multiply top and bottom by 2. So when we go to write this out, we've got 5x over 2x squared minus 8 over 2x squared. Now that the denominators are the same, we can now subtract the two numerator values. And again, they're not like terms, so you're just going to write it as 5x minus 8 over 2x squared. Okay, so there's no simplifying of that anymore. With our last example, again, lowest common denominator, and we do have algebra in the denominator. So we've got 3b and 6a. So let's look at the numbers first. If I've got 3 and 6, the lowest common denominator of 3 and 6 is 6. Okay, because I can multiply 3 by 2. Now I've got a b in the first term, so I'll need to have b in my lowest common denominator. And in my second term, I've got an a, so I'm going to need to have an a as well. So the lowest common denominator is going to be 6ab. In the first fraction, we've got 3b already, so we're going to need to multiply the top and the bottom by 2a. In our second fraction, we've already got 6a, so we need to just multiply by b. And so if we write that out, that numerator, 4a plus times 2a is 8a squared. Denominator is 6ab, plus the numerator is 5b squared over 6ab. So we can see the denominators are now the same, so we can add the numerators together, 8a squared plus 5b squared all over 6ab. There we go. So again, no more cancelling, no more we can't factorize this because it's a plus, not a minus. And we can't just cancel a square with the a because of the plus as well. So that's just a bit of a review and also a bit of an introduction to simple algebraic fractions when we're adding and subtracting. We're going to be doing a little bit more with adding and subtracting algebraic fractions in our next lesson as well.